Hello and welcome to step 1 of how to create a WhatsApp clone using Ionic2 and Meteor. Ionic2 is a framework which helps you create mobile applications using only JavaScript. First, you gotta make sure that you have Ionic installed. You can install it simply using npm and just pay attention that you use the beta version, otherwise the second version of Ionic is not going to be installed, only the first version. So to create our application, we simply use Ionic CLI and we type Ionic start, the name of our app, in this case it's going to be WhatsApp, and you use the v2 flag. Now let's wait for it to create. This might take a while, so let's wait. Now that we have our project created, let's go into it and open it using a text editor. In this tutorial, I'm going to be using Sublime Text Editor, but you can use any text editor that you want. It doesn't really matter. Before we dive into it, I first want to start the project. Simply, you type Ionic serve in the terminal. And now we can go in our browser and open our application. By default, it's going to be open in port 8100. So this is how our application looks like, the initial look of it. So it's a very simple app. It has several tabs. Some of them they have content, some of them not. But it's a very basic app. Nothing special. So let's look at the project. You can see that if you're already familiar with Ionic 1, you can see that the skeleton, the base look of the project has a very similar look to Ionic 1. It has the www folder where all our builds are going to compile into. We have the index.html file. Also, it is provided with a gulp file where all our tasks are defined. We have the watch task, we have the build task, and unlike Ionic 1, in Ionic 2 we don't use Power anymore, we use npm. So you can install any package that you want, and then Ionic 2 will know how to handle it and compile it into our application. As long as the package is compatible with the browser, then you can use it. So our application is defined in the app directory, and this is the entry point of our application. Over here, this component is actually an Angular 2 component, and this is because Ionic 2 uses Angular 2. So you can probably notice that this is the new JavaScript because we can import modules. We can also use decorators, but it has several additions. We can use accessors, we can use private, we can also use public, that I can tell. We can have data types. This is done thanks to a language called TypeScript, and TypeScript is a preprocessor language which is eventually going to compile into ES5 JavaScript. So why Ionic 2 is using by default TypeScript? This is because they recommend to do so in Angular 2 team. It's because they want us to use data types for two reasons. One, it's because it's going to prevent runtime errors, because you can see these errors during compilation time. And second of all, Angular 2 uses these data types to make injections. So for example, Angular 2 knows that the first argument here is of type platform, and then it knows to create an instance of platform and inject it as the first argument, just like Angular 1 where you have a list of dependencies, and then based on these dependencies then Angular 1 makes these injections. The same goes for Angular 2, only it is based on data types. So our app sticks into a very clear methodology. It is made out of pages. Each page has its own directory, and it has a view, it has a style sheet, and it has a component. So in order to apply TypeScript, Ionic's build system is built on top of a module bundler called Browserify. In this tutorial, we're going to use a custom build config using Webpack. It's also a module bundler. So we're going to redefine our build system. Both module bundlers are great solutions for building our app, but Webpack provides us with some extra features like aliases, which are missing in Browserify. Let's create our initial Webpack config. We simply create a new file. We're going to call it Webpack config. It's a JavaScript file. The first thing we want to define in our Webpack build system is to build our app. The entry point of our app is going to be app.ts. Notice that TypeScript files have an extension of TS files, and it's going to compile into the www directory. So we'll start implementing it, and then I will explain. So let's have a brief overview for each of the properties in our config. We have the entry, where our app's entry script is going to be defined using a relative path. The output, as I said, it's going to be defined in the www directory. Here we have external modules defined. So what it means that normally Cordova should be defined on the window, but since we define it as an external module, we can import it using the new JavaScript syntax, like so. Also, we can, thanks to the handler over here, we can load Cordova plugins also using the new JavaScript module system. So we can, for example, import the keyboard plugin like so. Yeah. Next is the resolve property. It means that the following extensions are going to be compiled using Webpack. We have the loaders defined here. What it means that using regular expression, that any file with the TS extension is going to be compiled using TypeScript. And if we build our application using the -- release option, then we're going to have several additions to our config. Usually we're going to use this option in production because it's going to minify our application. It's going to compile it with source maps, but you don't want it in development mode because you want to be able to comfortably debug it and not see a very messy script. So now that we have our Webpack config ready, we're going to add few adjustments to the ts config file. Now this file is a configuration file for the TypeScript compiler. We simply want to add more entry points for our TypeScript compiler so it can be provided with declaration files. I'm going to explain it in the next steps, what exactly it means. And we also wanted to exclude folders like node modules and www because all the scripts there shouldn't be compiled. So let's go ahead and edit the config. Okay, so now that we have our TypeScript config ready, let's go through the gulp file and give a short explanation for it. Now, Ionic 2 apps are created with tasks like linting and building, and they can be run by us whenever we want. So these tasks are defined in this file, and they are performed by a toolkit called gulp. So for example, the tasks which are responsible for building our app are build. So it's gonna build our application only once, and mostly it is used for production. And we have the watch task. It also builds our app, only it watches for changes. So whenever we change our app, then it's gonna rebuild, and it is used mostly for development. So once we type Ionic serve, then Ionic is gonna use this task over here with several addition tasks it's gonna run. But which means that whenever we make a change, then we immediately gonna see it in the browser. So as I said, by default, Ionic2 uses Browserify. We want to replace Browserify with Webpack. using our config we just defined. Let's edit the gulp file. Okay, now that our gulp file is ready, let's take a look at it and see what exactly I changed. So instead of using Browserify, I use Webpack here, and Ionic's team uploaded several packages to npm which gonna make our lives easier because they are fitted into gulp tasks they defined. So the original one was Ionic gulp Browserify. I replaced it with Webpack. And then in the watch task, I simply added the watch flag. And in addition, I provided it with the Webpack config defined in our app's root directory. So now whenever we build it, it's going to use Webpack. So now all is left to do is install the npm dependencies, all the packages we used so far, so it's going to function well. So first we want to uninstall the Browserify package because we have no need in it. So we simply type npm uninstall, the name of the package, and we want to save it. And we want to install all the packages we used in our Webpack config, which contains the following. And now that we have everything installed and ready to go, we can go ahead and start our application, again using Ionic Serve. And let's see if our app is working. Okay, so now it's working. The result is exactly the same, only this time we use a different build system and we're provided with a config which makes our app much more extensible. In the next steps, you're gonna see why it's good that we replaced it with a Webpack config. As for now, this is the first step of this tutorial, and see you in the next step.